Welcome to another episode of Boots on the Ground, podcast brought to you by Dogs on Deployment. I'm Kylie, and today I'm very excited to be sitting down with Heather. Heather is one of our Dogs on Deployment boarders located in the San Diego area, and she's also a Navy spouse. Welcome, Heather. Thanks so much for joining with us today.
Thank you, Kylie. It's a pleasure.
Well, I'm so excited to talk with you today. You're a repeat Dogs on Deployment boarder for us, actually. You've had multiple pets in your care. Would you mind telling myself and our listeners a little bit about your first time boarding a pet through Dogs on Deployment and what it was like for you and how it shaped your journey as a volunteer with us?
I would love to share that story. So I had heard about dogs on deployment via social media and later found out that they were a partner with San Diego Humane, our animal shelter here in San Diego. And so it sort of came together well. And then the first dog that I accepted uh, shortly after I signed on with as a boarder, fortunately, that owner, she had PCS'd and TDY'd quite a bit before. She's been active duty Navy surface for almost 20 years. So this was not her first rodeo. She knew what to do to prepare. She had boarded her dog before, but not with dogs on deployment. It was her first one with DoD. And she was very well organized. The dog was super well behaved. It just went as well as it possibly could. And of course, after that, I was hooked.
And what was that dog's name, that first one that you had?
Well, ironically, his name was Bradley, which is also my spouse's name. So
Oh
we
my gosh.
we always had to figure out who was a good boy. Who was a good boy today with us?
It's so funny. I'll share with our listeners too. I was corresponding with Heather to get this interview set up for Boots on the Ground, and it was so funny. I got an email and it says, "Hi, this is Bradley, not the dog." And I was like, "What does he mean, not the dog?" And it was so funny. I went back and looked. I was like, "Oh my gosh, he's totally right. He's Bradley. They have a dog, Bradley. That's hilarious." I mean, what are the odds? There's thousands and thousands of pet names in existence.
Right.
That's so funny. So speaking of pets, now you had Bradley initially, but you've now since moved on and have had multiple pets. Can you share with us? I know you shared with me previously, but I would love for our listeners to learn a little bit more. You shared how meaningful that it was for photos to be sent of the pets that are in your care while their parents are deployed. Can you take us into one of those moments and what it was like sharing those photos?
Yeah, I mean, it is truly I know, and anybody who's listening who's actually been separated from their pet, you know this, but it's true. Those photos mean so much to the owners, and I'm become very good about sending the photos out because I know that they're overwhelmed. It really makes a difference, even though the owner, the service member, is getting inundated with emails and just life, life underway all the time, that mental break for them of just getting, a nice picture of their pet and just that happy memory of their pet makes a huge difference for them. The previous owners have shared with me that they were underway on a carrier and everyone in their department, all their bunkmates, had pictures, of course, of kids, family, and pets, printed out and
Oh, that's so
posted,
cute.
in their racks on the walls. And so that we knew that those photos were actually getting printed out and put up on the walls there in their spaces. So yeah, those photos are being appreciated. And every time I've sent a photo, I get an emailer back saying thank you, loved it. It really makes a difference, and it's one of those easy wins, right? It doesn't take long to snap a quick photo of the animal, throw it in an email or a text, and send it, and it just makes such a difference for morale.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of pets, we'll get back on track in just a moment. I just want to take a moment that way people aren't confused by what's going on here. This is my dog, Carly. She decided that she needed attention during this interview podcast. So, this is who she is now joined by today. Um,
Well, she's happier now. Thanks, Mom.
Oh my gosh, she's so much happier, and I'm happy to have her. I just wanted to make sure I properly introduced who's now kind of popping in and out of my screen here. So it's mentioned that I love that the photos were sent and that, service members that have pets were able to participate in that. I know how much it means to me to see a picture of my dog when I'm on vacation. I can't even imagine what it feels like going through a deployment. So seeing a pet and sharing those photos. So thank you for taking the time, like you mentioned, that quick second to just take a picture and send it. I'm sure it means the world to them, and we appreciate dogs on deployment when our borders send our service member those photos.
So yeah, I've been sending photos, and then, that it communication, more communication is better than less. And you're always, of course, always
Absolutely.
keeping in mind that the service member, if you have the pet, that service member is somewhere where they're busy, but it also, they will take the time as they can. You may not be able to reach them in the moment, but they will be responsive to you, because it makes their day.
Well, and I love that you brought up communication because that's something that you and I have talked about together previously that I would love for our listeners to get a little bit more information on. So, for those that might be new to dogs on deployment or considering boarding, just to take a quick moment to explain how our Hero Pet boarding network actually works. So, when you register as a boarder, you go through this process to create your account, and then you also fill out information about your household as well as what type of pets you would be interested in taking for how long. And then as a boarder, there's two different opportunities that can happen. When your profile is set to public, service members can search for boarders that they need for their pet, and then they can reach out to you if they think that you're going to be a good fit for their pet. And vice versa. If you're really excited and gun ho and would love to take on a military pet into your care, you can also do a radius search as well for pets that are currently in need in your area. Now, where communication comes into this is you actually can, I mentioned, you reach out and you message. That happens through your dashboard in the Hero Pet Boarding Network. But that's just the very beginning of the communication. From there, we recommend doing, meet and greets, having thorough conversations with service members pertaining to their pet. And Heather would actually has some really great information and some personal experiences that she would like to go into a little bit more detail with you, so that way you can get some ideas and feedback on what that looks like from the boarder's perspective.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for bringing up the meet and greets, because as you might expect, that is really key. Try to be able to do it for both parties at a time where you've got, an hour or two. You've got the time that the person is relaxed, the pet's relaxed, and that you have the time to really sit down and talk. Um, there's no replacement for that, right? Actually bringing the animal to the location where they're going to be, seeing how they react to things, making sure the fence is tall enough, things like that.
Absolutely. And
And
even on a
I
weekend, if you have it, do a sleepover trial
absolutely.
run. If you have time, of course, Dogs on Deployment totally acknowledges that unfortunately sometimes short notice deployments happen and you can't always take all of those steps. But we do, like you mentioned, even 30 minutes to an hour when possible to make sure that the dog is set and happy to go, as well as the boarder and, of course, the service member.
Murphy, Murphy is there. Murphy's always there. So you need to be prepared for all kinds of contingencies, God forbid, medical issues, and especially for the longer term deployments. The ones I've had, I think the shortest one I had was 6 months. So a lot can happen in those months. And as you know, the pet, as they first enter your household, they're in one mode, and then, as they get more settled in, their personality changes, their behavior changes. But communication up front is so important. And these are military service members. They are accustomed to direct, clear communication, right? They're
Absolutely.
used to being told, like, you will do this, you will do that, and this is how it's going to be. This is so you don't have to, kind of dance around issues, harder issues. That I find that's really important. One thing I do, because I still do work part-time, and during a 6 month or longer period when I'm boarding, I will be away from home. I have to do my own job too. I have to do my own TDYs. So one thing I be sure to do when I initially make contact with a potential deployee is to tell them, I'm going to be away from, I won't be able to care for your pet during these dates. You need, you will be responsible for finding a plan B or a plan C during those dates. I'm putting this out there ahead of time. So that is one thing, because it's true. Most of us, I don't know too many people who will not have some sort of life event in span of several months that, is going to affect their ability to be a boarder, and contingencies happen or family vacations happen, travel
Absolutely. I'm
happens.
glad you brought that up because that's what I was going to bring up as well. Is that's occasionally someone will be like, "Oh, well, I would love to board, but I have a vacation coming up." That's totally okay because there's so many different options, which is why communication is so important because you can bring that vacation up at the time of that initial conversation with the service member and be like, "Hey, you have a 6-month time span here. During month 3, I'm going to go on vacation for 2 weeks." That's totally okay. Just communicate that with them up front, and then the service member can, of course, have other arrangements. Or on occasion, of course, you might be able to definitely talk with dogs on deployment too. You might be able to get them placed with another boarder for that 2-week time frame as well. So we don't, life happens and we get it, of course. And please, if you're remotely considering being a boarder for dogs on deployment, know that we understand you're human. You have everything else going on, no different than our service members, of course, have to leave and go do something, even though they're pet owners. So just communicate. It's wonderful. You can get everything straightened out and arranged for what works best for you, the service member, and of course, the pet themselves. And I love that you brought that up because we are human at the end of the day and we all have our life going on, but that doesn't mean you can't take on a pet. And while your personal boarding timeframes have been as little as 6 months and then of course longer, I want to also make sure that our listeners know too, if you are considering being a boarder for dogs on deployment, we do have service members that will go on trainings for, a couple of weeks or a couple of days. It's not always necessarily just deployments. We help with any service commitments or hardships when it comes to our service members, veterans, and even our first responders. So just take a look and search through our network because if you're not quite ready to do that 6 months or longer commitment, we do have other pets that are in need of short-term commitments. That it's a great way to get your feet wet and see if dogs on deployment and boarding is something that you're interested in.
Yeah, exactly. And it's true that there are situations. So when the owner is gone for months and months, they may have a roommate, a family member, that can take the animal for a few days, but that person in their life isn't going to be available for 6 months or whatever for a long-term TDY. So in general, that has not been a problem when I say like, hey, there's going to be a 2-week window where you'll have to make alternate arrangements, is how I put it. Yeah, and that's not been a problem because there'll be somebody in their circle of friends and family who can take the animal for a short amount of time, who may not be willing to take it for an entire deployment. And also, financially, yes, no, I don't think anybody I know can afford to board a pet for months on end. The cost of
Absolutely
goods
not.
sold for a week, maybe they can find a paid boarding situation or a house sitter. Um, as a matter of fact, I'm going on vacation in a couple weeks and working it out with the owner. Yeah, I'd let them know ahead of time. And then the plans that we had mutually made together fell through a few weeks ago, but I was able to find somebody locally and that it worked out fine. Even though we were going into contingency after contingency, it's gonna be taken care of. It's actually been a win-win for us because I get a house sitter while I'm on vacation, and then the Harvey is being taken care of. So that worked out really well. And yeah, and that also, again, the communication, doing it through the DoD dashboard is important. I get that sometimes, obviously when you're communicating via the dashboard, via the website, you have a bit of a lag unless the person is constantly checking the website. But you have documentation, it's a record, DoD can see, can be aware of things that are going on. And it's always a good idea just in case, things don't go well or there's disagreements later. I've not had that experience, but I'm aware that it has happened. So that way DoD is looped in. But then sometimes obviously you have to have, text communication for really quick turnaround things, like when the person's coming for the meet and greet and they say like, hey, I'm here in the driveway, things like that. So you have to have multiple means of communication, but the dashboard is really important, especially up front and for the longer things like the care plan and just setting expectations. It really helps. But yeah, communication is key. I generally would recommend that as part of the onboarding plan, that once you have matched up with a dog and an owner or pet and an owner, that one of the things you talk about is medical care and what, and that is a very hard conversation to have, especially most of the animals that I've boarded have been older. And so that is just, it is, in the midst of all the other stresses that that service member is having, in the middle of getting ready to PCS or TDY, to say, hey, worst case scenario, what, what are your thoughts? It's very, very hard for any of us to say, well, my dollar limit is, X or Y, when, nobody can really be prepared for that. But to have that conversation, particularly if it's an older animal, what are your quality of life concerns? How do you, what are your parameters of what kind of care? And how much are you willing to spend to treat, a non-emergency issue, things like that, because it is, um, could be a situation where you cannot reach the service member and during a medical emergency, or at least not as quickly as you would like. And to have that conversation ahead of time can prevent a lot of misunderstandings.
Well, and I really appreciate you bringing that up because that's such a good point in so many different ways. So I'll start with you mentioned the care plan. That's a very critical piece. Yes, of course, when you make that connection with the service member and you really start to get into the nitty-gritty, like coordinating of like picking up, doing the meet and greets, dropping off, of course, please by all means pursue text messaging and phone calls. But as you mentioned, that initial contact through the dashboard is very critical because the care plan that you mentioned, what happens is once you've done everything that you need to do, meet and greets are happening, you've coordinated, you're ready to get that pet, it's very important that the service member physically deploys their pet to you as the boarder in the system through the dashboard, and then you as the boarder have to physically go into your end of the dashboard and accept that deployment because one, it gives you access to that care plan that you mentioned, which does cover and talk about it's like a roadmap for everything on that dog that the service member or cat or whatever their pet is. They've filled it out and given you a roadmap of here's everything you need to know about my pet. So a lot of that information pertaining to like medical emergencies and stuff is included in there, but you have to make sure you have the pet deployed to you and then accept it in order to access it. And while that
Mhm.
information, of course, is discussed through the care plan, communication is so important. Have those conversations more in depth. Take a look at the care plan before you physically get the pet and go, hey, let's go over this together. I've read through this. Be sure to ask them any questions you may have. Have those conversations in depth. And yes, of course, nobody wants to have those conversations about like what happens to my pet if I'm not here and there's a medical emergency. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, we can't guarantee that's not going to happen. And it's so important, not just for you as the boarder to know what to do in that situation to hopefully make that process a little bit less stressful because you've already had those conversations with the pet owner, but then you also know what is desired by the pet owner in those situations. And I also want to make sure our listeners know too, you're not left out in the dark in those scenarios. Dogs on Deployment is here to support our boarders, service members, and pets through all stages of the boarding process and beyond. So if you ever have any concerns and there's an emergency or just a simple question, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to support you, and we can't do what we do without you as our volunteer boarders at the end of the day. So, anytime you need anything, and this goes for Heather or otherwise, reach out. We're here to support you. And I appreciate you, Heather, mentioning, medical emergencies because, you never say never. You never know what's going to happen. As a military spouse myself, we always joke that it's Murphy's Law. Something is bound to go wrong when your spouse is deployed. And sometimes that does come over into the pets on occasion as well. So, as a boarder, have those conversations. You never know. And hopefully, if you talk about it, it doesn't happen. But, heaven forbid it does, you at least are a little bit more prepared in that scenario.
Mhm. When I've had verbal conversations with people, as I have the dogs out and around, and I say, oh, yeah, talking to people as we're walking the dog, and it's like, oh, this dog's on deployment. Well, how does that work? The first thing I tell them is, there is a format, there's a procedure for matching up, and the most important thing is for these people who are asking the questions is step one, the animal's owner puts their credit card on file with their vet, because that's the the first thing that people are thinking about, like, oh my gosh, you have all this, possible liability, but that right there, having the vet information and the credit card on file, that is such a huge peace of mind that DoD provides that, someone just taking care of someone's pet, you don't normally get that benefit.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I love that you mentioned that because there's so many other things that we communicate with our service members that the borders might not necessarily see right off the bat, like
So
having we
true.
highly recommend service members putting their credit card on file with their vet as well as some authorization on, like, things that they are and aren't willing to pay for.
Oh, good
Um,
point.
yeah,
Yes.
as well as, like, setting up deliveries through Chewy or some other, delivery avenue so that way your boarder's continuing to get your pet's food and supplies throughout the entire boarding process. But in regards to that credit card specifically, and I know this is not, a scenario that applies to everyone, but on occasion we will have some borders that might be a little bit further away from the service member's home base. So, typically their own personal vet might be a little bit further away than normal, something that's not necessarily feasible for the boarder to travel to, especially in the case of an emergency. Again, it all goes back to communication. Have that conversation with the service member once you get that boarding care plan. If you're a couple hours away and the vet that they have on file is not feasible for you, simply have that conversation. Be like, hey, look, in an emergency, if something's going on, I can't get your dog, to get the care it needs in a timely manner all the way to that veterinarian. So have those conversations, make other arrangements. The great thing about dogs on deployment throughout the entire process is both the service member and the boarder has that opportunity to be very hands-on and make decisions for what works best for them and what doesn't. So if you see that board and care plan, say, "Hey, I can't travel, a couple hours away in an emergency to get your pet cared for. Where do you want me to go?" You can have that conversation, and if the service member goes, I actually really want just that vet, then they have that opportunity to pursue potentially another border that's closer to their home base, and vice versa. Everyone has full control over what's going to be best for them, and you don't have to take a pet if you're not interested or not comfortable, or if it's not the best fit for you. No different than it's same thing for the service member. If you've got a high energy pet that needs a 6-foot fence, and unfortunately you just don't have that, then, the service member moves on and continues to have those conversations. So that way, all parties involved have the best opportunity to thrive and enjoy the pet that's in their care.
Exactly. And I would just add to that, when your comments reminded me, uh, the owner should speak with their veterinarian, not just about the financial aspect of it, but also the authorizations, right? Because if I take your animal into your veterinarian, I am not the owner. I am not the legal owner of this animal. So if they want to pre-authorize certain things, that's a really helpful thing with the veterinarian. You say, like, if Heather brings my animal in, uh, please prescribe any medications, like Heather is authorized for me to do medications. Obviously, that would be something that will come in very handy if there's time allowed for that, because it's the financial authorization plus also the care authorizations, and veterinarians are used to dealing with that with pet sitters and things like that. So that's another really helpful thing. And fortunately, I've not had issues with that, but it's just, again, something to think about.
Absolutely. Well, now that we've kind of talked a little bit about all the different aspects that go into being a boarder, from the process of beginning that conversation to having the pet in your care, the other part that then inevitably comes is the reunion of the pet with their owner and their human. What would you say? So, some boarders or people that are potentially interested in becoming boarders, they often manage how our boarders let go of those pets that they've been caring for a couple weeks, couple of months, some, a year or longer. What helps you personally, Heather, stay grounded in that transition that happens? And why do you feel it's different, the reunion with your service member versus fostering pets and letting them go to their home?
No, it's completely different. It's apples and oranges. And I know it's a common concern. People say, I've cared for this animal for months and months. They've become part of the household. They've become part of the family. How would I ever say goodbye? I think a lot of your boarders have mentioned this before. It's not a problem. It really isn't. It's a bittersweet moment because you have become attached to the animal, but it is not like fostering. It is not like surrendering a pet. It's they're going back to their happy home.
You've also mentioned to dogs on deployment before that you've actually built some relationships with the service members and pet owners that you have cared for their pets. So even though you're sending them back home, you kind of come into that little piece of their home. Would you mind sharing with our listeners a little bit more about one of those lasting connections that you have made with a pet owner and what it means to you?
Yes. So I've boarded 4 dogs for 3 owners because one of the boardings was a pair of dogs. And funny you should mention, I believe, let's see, yeah, today is Thursday. Next Wednesday, one of my previous uh, dogs comes back
Oh
for
my
a
gosh,
short
really?
stay. That is, and I would say that this is not with DoD. This is not, it is not part of the program. This is just we love this dog. So also do not, if the service member isn't always in contact, before or after their TDY deployment, whatever it is, it's because they just have so many things going on. It's not that they aren't thinking about their animal. It's not that they don't like you. It's just, I mean, and most of your boarders have probably been through some military experience or have some military connection. You get it, right? There's just so much going on, especially, as you come on and off of deployments. So, I mean, yeah, some of the boarders we've just not kept in touch because they've moved away and they're not around. So yeah, don't take that personally if that happens too. I mean, most of us, we get it, right?
Well, it's definitely a military way of life, unfortunately, for those that might not necessarily be, in the trenches of it. People move away, unfortunately, regularly when you're in the military. So I
Right.
really appreciate you touching on that because, while a lot of our borders are in some way, shape, or form either connected to the military or a veteran or a spouse to some capacity, we have so many fabulous borders nationwide that really just love pets and want to support, America's heroes. And they might not have that connection. So I really love that you touched on that and kind of explained like there is so much, especially, like people will be like, oh, I haven't heard back from this person that I reached out to, seeing if I could take their pet. There is so much that goes on for a service member, both with their job and all of their personal stuff leading up to having to leave for a deployment that unfortunately, they might not be able to respond to every single message that they have, but they ultimately coordinate with that one. So I really appreciate you touching on that. That way, for if any of our listeners out there are not necessarily connected to the military in some way, shape, or form, we give that little bit of information to know. Yeah, definitely don't take it personally, please, by any means. We're all doing the best that we can, and it's not that they don't care. It's just unfortunately sometimes time doesn't permit them to message everyone that they would love to message back, and also doesn't always necessarily permit them being in constant or continued contact after the fact. But for, in your situation with Bradley, there are some that do, and it's a beautiful thing. And a lot of our boarders have said to me, anytime I talk about the dogs on deployment community, they're very fast to correct me that it's a family and it's not a community. So you never know. Take that leap, and you might get a dog named Bradley that happens to have their same spouse's name. You never know. Well,
Yeah.
boarding comes with its own set of challenges from, having pets that, are a little bit messy, juggling schedules, not just your own personal schedule, like you mentioned, but also, of course, the pet's own schedule that they've become accustomed to. What keeps you motivated, Heather, despite all of those obstacles? And what has that experience taught you about community and compassion?
Yes. Oh, it's been great. I mean, it really is a community. And again, I want to re-hit your point of if you're considering being a boarder and you think, oh my God, I don't have a lifestyle that lets me take an animal for months and months and months on end. There are ways, right? Don't think that you don't have the flexibility because you can make it work. And so the challenge is, yeah, like Harvey, our current dog, who I have become quite attached to, love him to death. But again, as I mentioned, his routine belonging to an active service member Harvey was used to getting up very early, and so and now of course the sun's coming up early. So Harvey's like, "Sun's out, guns out," and Harvey, we are, we are a civilian household full of retirees. We do not wake up when you do. So we've had to, like, again, as the process goes, Harvey's learning to sleep later, and I'm learning to get up earlier, right? The
Meeting in
challenge.
the middle with the compromise.
Meeting in the middle, yeah. So there are things, I'm again a minor thing like that, but yeah, that's a challenge. Obviously, I'd rather have a great dog around the house than a clean house. But I have to admit, when I am between borders, it's so nice, like, oh, look, I cleaned the house and a week later it's still clean. I don't have nose prints all over everything that I own. Um, so yeah, I mean, but having the animals there, we all do it because we love it. The challenges, DoD is there to help. I know you all have people who have behavior specialists, things like that, because obviously the behaviors can be a problem, and you try to prepare for that. Again, listen to what your owner has to tell you, read the boarding plan, ask the questions, and for the owners, be honest. If your dog has or cat has some sort of behaviors that aren't great, don't try to sugarcoat that. Address it up front, because if it happens, it happens, and better that the boarder be prepared for that. If there's a chewing problem, if there's a separation anxiety, things like that, better to be prepared for that, and talk about how to work through it. But yeah, the dog that you have, as people who have fostered know, there's the 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. The behaviors change as those times pass. The way the animal is going to behave the first few days are always the roughest, right? As you get used to each other, as the animal learns what you expect. And I do also recommend talking to the owner about what commands the dog knows, because it's one of the things that's happened with Harvey is, like all dogs, as we walk, he wants to stop and sniff, and that's cool. That's what we're there for, right? That's why we go for walks.
Absolutely.
But at some point you have to say, come on, that tree is not that fascinating. We have to get on with our lives. And so I would do that with the previous dogs. I would say, Bradley or Harvey or whoever, 1, 2, 3, and then they would get a tug on the leash, right? So that's like, I would let you sniff, but we gotta, come on, we gotta move it on. Um, Talking with Harvey's owner, he's like, oh no, it's for us, it's 3, 2, 1. So now
Oh no,
so
so he's thinking he's got all this
yeah,
extra
he's
time.
using essentially the same command, but backwards. So
Oh,
now I've changed the command, and I also, yeah, Harvey knows the command stop. He doesn't. It's not stay or wait so just those simple things, like what words the animal knows, saves you a lot of time, and saves the animal the stress of retraining. So yes, 3, 2, 1, not 1, 2, 3.
so here Harvey was thinking he had even more time.
Right, like a sniff all day. Yeah, so that the challenges of the first few days, and obviously as the dog learns like where to go to the bathroom, where not. So all of these things, like that, it's not a problem, it's not a challenge, it's not a bad behavior. It's just an adjustment in the environment, in the routine. So working through that is always the challenge the first few days. And again, the more you talk with the owner ahead of time, or if you even can just reach out to them and be like, why do they not want to go outside? Something like that makes a difference.
Absolutely. No different than us humans, every pet is totally different. So practicing that communication and all different aspects is going to make that pet's adjustment hopefully better. And of course, as always, like Heather mentioned, feel free to if able, reach out to the service member to get questions answered about their pet. Definitely reference your boarding care plan because there is a lot of helpful information in there. And As always, if all else fails, please reach out to Dogs on Deployment. We're here to help you through that process. We have a lot of really great resources on our blog as well. It's at dogsondeployment.blog. Lots of really awesome pet tips, guides, and informations, and ones that will even help walk you through that meet and greet process that we talked about earlier as well. So definitely check that out. And of course, if you can't find what you're looking for, reach out. We're always happy to help.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I can't overemphasize having the backup of dogs on deployment with those resources, with just the expertise, the both the dogs on deployment volunteers, employees that have been down this road, right? You've probably seen all kinds of situations that I couldn't even anticipate. So having that as a backup, having that support is really key.
Well, and having these conversations with wonderful boarders like you is also key to that as well. I really appreciate you sitting down with us today, Heather, and telling our listeners about your experience and giving some really great insights as well into the inner workings of what it's like boarding for dogs on deployment.
It's a joy. I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. We really appreciate it and can't wait to see more pictures of Harvey.
They're on their way.
Hey there, it's Elisa Johnson, president of Dogs on Deployment. As a veteran and a pet owner, I know firsthand the challenges military members face, especially when it comes to pet ownership during deployment, training, or PCS moves overseas. That's why I created Dogs on Deployment. We are the only free to use nationwide online network of volunteer pet boarders willing to care for military member pets during their service commitments. We have one goal: to prevent unnecessary pet relinquishment by service members due to their service commitments. No military member should have to give up their beloved pet when duty calls. But we have one problem. We need you in order to help us achieve mission success. If you support the troops and love animals, you can sign up to volunteer to board one of our pets in need or make a donation online to support our Hero Pet Boarding Network. Don't wait. Visit dogsondeployment.org to get started. And don't forget to follow us on social media too. And hey, just because we're called Dogs on Deployment doesn't mean we don't help cats too. I've got dogs, cats, and even chickens, and through our network, we've helped every type of pet. So don't wait. Visit dogsondeployment.org today to support your troops and their pets.